Donald Trump, property tycoon and media personality turned 45th President of the United States, and possibly the 47th as well, is perhaps the most Googled individual in all time. And it's not surprising to see why. The ultimate Marmite figure, no other person has created such charged and opposing reactions in the general public. My name is Jack Aaron. I'm a qualified psychologist who specialises in personality analysis of very senior and powerful figures. In this video, I will delve deep into the mind of Donald Trump, warts and all. To do this, we will need to look back at the origins of Trump to find out why he is the way he is, and how he has changed and developed over time. This will help us to figure out his personality type, giving us a coherent picture of his natural strengths and weaknesses, his values and underlying motivations. By the end, I'll hopefully have answered a few of your questions. Is he out for vengeance? Is he a danger to American democracy? Regardless of your politics, there are things in here that will surprise you and give you a new perspective on the most controversial leader of the free world in our lifetimes. Donald John Trump was born on June the 14th, 1946, in Queens, New York City, the fourth child of Fred and Mary Ann McLeod Trump. Fred, a son of German immigrants and a multimillionaire real estate developer, was known for his extreme work ethic. He was ruthlessly opportunistic and was so frugal that he refused to have an office for most of his career. Fred clearly prioritized raising his children to be every bit as tough as he was, and so he sent the young Donald to New York Military Academy. Donald later went to Wharton School in the University of Pennsylvania, gaining a bachelor's degree in economics in 1968. Within the year, he had begun working in his father's company, learning quickly and rising up to become president in 1971. The newly empowered Donald renamed the family business to the Trump Organization, defining the brand that would grow famous in the decades to come. In 1977, he married his first wife, Ivana, and in 1978, he began to carve out his own set of projects in Manhattan, starting with the renovation of the old Commodore Hotel, where he secured an unprecedented 40-year tax abatement, negotiating behind the scenes with politicians to get what he wanted. Then, in 1980, he began work on Trump Tower, demolishing the Bonwit Teller building and, controversially, destroying 2 Art Deco friezes to save a couple of weeks' building time. Similarly, in 1986, Trump was awarded a contract to repair Central Park's Wollman Rink, which still was expected to take 18 months to complete. Donald got it done in $4 and $775,000 under budget. And now, let's look at our first interview of him at the age of 33. A word of warning, this is not the Donald you are used to.
You bought some prized properties at the bottom of the New York market in the 1970s. Inner cities have been pure gold since that time. Why? Because replacement costs have just gone up so much?
Well, no, not really. I had a great faith in New York. Primarily, our purchases have been in New York, and about 5 years ago, New York was not considered very hot, and cities in general weren't considered too hot. And we purchased the old Commodore Hotel, and we've reconverted that now into about $110 million Grand Hyatt Hotel, which is opening up next week in New York City. And we've made some other purchases that have been fine.
Is that your general advice to people who are interested in real estate investment, though? Look to the inner cities, look to old buildings and doing something with them?
Well, I like the inner cities. I see the inner cities as being sort of a wave of the future now. I think with the problems of fuel and the gasoline shortages and everything else, and the transportation, especially in the major cities such as New York and Los Angeles and Chicago, I see the inner cities as being probably, in terms of a real estate or in a real estate sense, probably the most viable investments.
Did you notice how oddly factual his answers are? There's none of the exaggeration and provocative language he is known for. This is Trump before he has gained confidence in his image, before he started to take social risks in public. So he falls back on what is easy for him to communicate without risk: the facts. This may surprise some of you who would associate Donald with a lack of factual awareness, but videos like these show that the ability to process and articulate such information is actually a strength of his. This powerful grasp of factual information gave Donald an intimate knowledge of property development and how to work around taxation, facilitating his ability to identify pressure points and areas in which he could press his advantage to negotiate tactical wins. There was also that ability to operate very quickly and efficiently where needed, and to ensure those working under him would follow suit. His audacity and no shortage of aggression were very much at play here behind the scenes, with Trump threatening to get one local official fired for their misgivings over his requested tax breaks. Bold, commercial, and above all with that tough-as-nails killer instinct, that's Donald at his best, and very much the figure who would have made his father proud. You could say that it was Fred's influence who made Donald who he is today, but that wouldn't be the full truth. After all, Donald was the second son. He was never meant to inherit his father's business. Initially, hopes had been placed on his elder brother, Fred Trump Jr. Nevertheless, being raised in a way that strongly encouraged these attributes likely gave Donald the license to be like this unabashedly, where he may have felt the need to temper these aspects if raised differently. Unlike Donald, Fred Jr. shared very little of his father's ruthlessness and commercial drive. Instead, he decided to become a pilot, a decision held in contempt by his father, and one which a young Donald also mocked. Around the time of this video, the troubles of life got too much for Fred Jr., and he turned to the drink, eventually dying from a heart attack at the age of 43. This deeply affected Donald, and since then he has been a teetotaler, abstaining from alcohol and cigarettes. Now it's time for another interview. Whilst the previous one gave us a surprising sense of how Trump used to be, this interview will show us a glimmer of what that young man will become.
Did you go outside and play ball, or did you have what we call a normal life, a normal upbringing, or were you constantly taught from day one, Donald, you must be a success and gear your head this way and travel down that road and never move to the left and never move to the right?
Well, Rona, I think I was probably brought up in a very normal fashion. We did have a house. I do have brothers and sisters. I have wonderful parents, wonderful family, really very wonderful family. I think we're a very highly motivated family. But again, I would never use the word ambition. And because to me, ambition's a bad word. It's not ambitious. You know, when I see people saying I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm so ambitious and it really sickens me to listen to them talking. I think it's just something that we were motivated and properly motivated. And I think we're motivated for the right things. We were also motivated toward family and toward good things. But I like to think that maybe the ideas that I've had have, you know, created what we've created over the past 5 or 6 years. Ideas that maybe at the time people didn't believe in. A lot of people didn't believe in them. We built a hotel at a location and at a time in New York City's history when people were saying, oh, forget about it, it just cannot happen, it can't work, etc. Now the hotel is open, and I guess it's known as one of the greatest successes in real estate in the United States.
That's the Grand Hyatt.
That's the Grand Hyatt, which is built right next to Grand Central Terminal.
The 34-year-old Trump doesn't come across as too candid or authentic here. He avoids answering the question, griping about the word ambition, and giving vanilla answers that are very unlike what we know about the man today. But that's just a start. Mid-answer, he redirects himself, diving into yet another factual account of property development. Trump clearly wants to protect his reputation. He doesn't yet know what he can and cannot say, and so he goes to great lengths to avoid anything that may tarnish his reputation. In this, we see a dialectic forming, one where factual practicality, saying how things work in an accurate and complex but not necessarily fun or exciting way, is the easy approach for Trump, the one he can fall back on when feeling under pressure. In contrast, how he is emotionally received by others is both an area of anxiety and, as we will soon see, aspiration.
What said to you one day, Donald, you must go and buy the old Commodore Hotel and transform that into the new Grand Hyatt?
Well, I think it was monumental. You know, it was a monumental approach to things that I've sort of developed. The building itself was there. You had Grand Central Terminal there. You have the Pan Am building there. You have the Chrysler building there. The whole area is monumental. The key to that area was the old Commodore Hotel, which was now gutted and redone, and it's a spectacular hotel. The 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 process of doing the monumental deal to me has always been much easier than the process of doing the small deal. If instead we have friends that were in different locations trying to get similar tax abatements as I got for my hotel. They were doing non-monumental projects, a little shopping center in Queens, another one was doing a little shopping center in Brooklyn, all having the same basic thing. My deal was much easier to work than theirs because it was a monumental project. It was easier getting the tax abatement, it was easier getting the financing for the project, it was easier getting everything. Even though the numbers were much bigger, even though the project was many, many, many times bigger, my deal, in a sense, was easier than theirs because everybody reacted to my deal, whereas they didn't want to bother with the shopping center concept and they didn't want to bother with another little concept someplace else. So I really believe it's easier to do the big concepts that have a certain amount of glamour, and you know the word glamour very well, than it is to do the smaller, what seemingly would be the easier deal, but really I think, in fact, turns out generally to be the harder kind of transaction.
It is not long before we find what really drives Donald, and where he departs from his father. Although he quickly turns to the factual, practical excuse that it is cheaper and easier to focus on the big glamour projects in Manhattan, there is a deeper reason why Donald jumped at the chance to develop property in the most romanticized borough in New York City. Whilst his father was focused on making as much money as possible, plain and simple, Donald's choice to stamp the family name on the company, and on the tower, and on the hotel casinos, Trump's Castle and Trump Plaza, the airline Trump Shuttle, the mega yacht Trump Princess, and even Trump the Game, as well as to have Tony Schwartz write a Times best-selling book about him, The Art of a Deal, reveals a very different driver, the pursuit of prestige. Yes, practical competence and mastery of the facts is easy for Trump, but he isn't interested in attaining that mastery and takes it for granted. What he wants is something much harder and more perilous for him, the ability to win the admiration of others and maximize his reputation. And why is this so perilous? The answer is to be found here.
Do you have a best friend?
I have a lot of very good friends. A lot of
good friends.
Yeah, I would say that I have a lot of very good friends, but again, my business is so all-encompassing, I don't really get the pleasure of being with friends that much, frankly.
I mean, this is a strange question to ask, but God forbid you got sick in the middle of the night and your wife and your child weren't around and your housekeeper wasn't around and your parents weren't around. Who would you call if you were in trouble?
Well, maybe I'll call you, Rana. You know, I mean, you're such a nice woman and you look like you know your way around, certainly, so maybe I'd give you a little buzz.
But I'm not your best friend.
No, I know. I don't know. I guess I would have a list of people. I would have, certainly, I'd have to think of one very quickly, obviously, if that circumstance arrived.
But if there was somebody, I would imagine that person would have been sitting right there now on the top of your head when I asked you that question.
That could very well be. I'm not sure that I'd want to necessarily say that on television, who that person might be.
Well, I mean, you might say to me, I have such a person, but I'd rather not mention
Yeah, I would
their
say
name.
that I would have actually a few such people who I could call interchangeably, but I probably wouldn't mention who they would be.
Trump is strangely unwilling to answer a simple question on whether he has a best friend or not. In the other questions, it's clear Trump was only trying to protect his and the business's reputation. However, this appears to be different. And even when told he can easily answer that he has a best friend and just doesn't need to reveal the name, Trump openly says that he has lots of great friends instead of only one. What this shows is that, despite claiming to be great at understanding people, Donald seems unable to pick out and prioritize his personal relationships, not knowing who is really special and deserving that closeness, and who should be kept far away. As he says, people are interchangeable, and if you treat people interchangeably, that can greatly undermine the reputation you are trying to build. So, just to summarize where we are so far, we know Trump is quick-thinking, factual, and ruthlessly efficient, who leans back on the facts when needed, but secretly covets fame and prestige. At the same time, he lacks discernment into personal relationships, and has an unfortunate tendency to see even those who should be his closest friends without distinct individual value. This already is enough for us to settle on a personality type for Donald, the ESTP, which I like to call the Conqueror. The personality is characterized first and foremost by a desire to win, to gain possession of their physical surroundings, maximize the impact, and reach the pinnacle of any social hierarchy. This is supported by a capable balance of both pragmatic and systemic thinking, enabling quick learning, effective solutions, and use of rules, narratives, and structures to their advantage. The missing piece for this type is the understanding of personal attitudes, which is why Donald struggles to read intentions and orientate his relationships around a stable view of each person's character. This problem, alongside others, would come back to bite Donald in the following decade. If the 80s were the making of him, then the 90s will see him tested and eventually transformed into the Trump we know today. It all began with Donald divorcing Ivana in 1990, despite having had 3 children together.
It was a storybook merger, or so it seemed, the billionaire builder and the Czechoslovak model. Married for almost 13 years, the public personification of marital bliss. Donald Trump reportedly walked out this week, saying the marriage was no longer working and hoping to settle under terms of a prenuptial contract, guaranteeing Ivana the house, the kids, and more than $20 million. Ivana has rejected the deal, through a lawyer calling the contract unconscionable and fraudulent. This is so sudden, the only New York tribunal that's heard the case is the Court of Public Opinion. It's not just a marriage that's on the line, it's Donald Trump's reputation as a deal maker in a business he'll find brand new. And as Zsa Zsa Gabor once observed, you never really know a man until you have divorced him.
What's clear is that Donald approached this divorce as he would a business deal, acting with lightning speed and coldly defaulting to the terms of the prenup to keep the large majority of his fortunes. His eldest son, Donald Jr., didn't speak to him for a year. In the run-up to this divorce, Donald had had a highly publicised relationship with actress Marla Maples, the first of several different mistresses over the years, whom he then married in 1993. They would separate 4 years later, and divorce in 1999. As with his difficulty picking out a best friend, Donald's unfaithfulness and promiscuity, perhaps driven by his lack of trust in or recognition of the long-lasting good intentions of others, elevates this subtle blind spot into very public consequences. Rather than lifelong commitments, marriages and other friendships are relegated to temporary truces in an ongoing campaign of conquest. We've talked already about Trump's killer instinct and lightning-quick decisiveness. Well, the problem with a mind wired for tactical wins like this is that it is usually an impulsive one, and not suited to long-term strategic thinking. Partly because of this, Donald's success in the previous decade eventually matured into financial hardship. It all started in 1990, with Trump opening a new casino hotel in Atlantic City, the Trump Taj Mahal, which, partly due to adverse competition with the Trump's Castle and Trump Plaza, missed a debt payment a few months later, with Trump requesting a $65 million bailout. Eventually, all 3 hotels went into bankruptcy, needing a very complicated restructuring, with Donald already being sued by his ex-wife Ivana, owing billions of dollars in debt, about $970 million of which he was personally liable for. Trump was forced to sell his mega yacht, his airline, and even his stake in the Grand Hyatt. Not only this, but the real estate market collapsed, making further property development unviable. Rather than develop properties, Trump now had to make his money via some other means. He had already been making a number of cameo appearances in films and television shows, so Trump turned himself from property developer into a brand. And he was asked by producer Mark Burnett to star in the new reality TV series, The Apprentice. Something he initially thought was for the bottom feeders of society, but he was soon convinced otherwise. This popular show, which ran through the early 2000s, solidified Trump's reputation as a tough, powerful, combative, and highly successful figure who was more than willing to fire people who displeased him.
Do you understand me? And I'm going to sue you if I have to. Do you understand me? Yes, I hung up. You didn't get disconnected. I hung up.
You claim to be like me. The difference is I work hard.
You've been lazy. You've been nothing but trouble. Michael,
Yes, sir.
You're fired.
Once someone who made money from developing property, Trump had become something else, a brand, one known throughout America and abroad. Now, instead of getting rich from his own buildings, Trump would make his money sponsoring other buildings to be made, bearing his lucrative name, and the greater his public profile, the more wealthy he became. As he grew in confidence during the apprentice years and moved away from his earlier drier style of communication, he became more emotive, engaging, even dramatic. In line with his celebrity status, he gradually took on what his ghostwriter Tony Schwartz called truthful hyperbole, which would express an authentic feeling in an exaggerated way that had maximal impact on audiences, but which could at times play fast and loose with the truth. Although wealthy and famous now, Trump was still hungry for more. He still had further to climb to sit at the top of the social hierarchy, to truly be the boss of the world, and that pinnacle was the presidency of the United States. But now, with his money and his name recognition, Trump finally had what he needed to get there. It was during this time that Trump met his third and final wife, Melania Naus, a Slovenian model whom he would marry in 2005. This was also the time when Donald, never quiet about his political views, began to actively pursue the presidency of the United States, starting with his run in the California and Michigan primaries for the populist, radical centrist Reform Party. Although the political party is different, and with it the seriousness of his intention to win, the essence of his political positions are remarkably consistent with his presidential run 16 years later. This is another thing people don't understand about Trump, but which becomes clear once you know he's the conqueror type, where his use of structural thinking must serve his forceful outlook on life. If you apply the lens of conservative versus liberal, you won't see it, and instead think that he's contradicting himself with liberal takes on universal health care and making Oprah Winfrey a member of his cabinet. Apply instead a different lens of civic nationalist, and it becomes clear that Trump's key priorities are unchanged. The desire to control the borders, counter the trade deficits, and be tough on other countries like China are all there. And it shows that Trump is not simply an opportunist. There's a clear ideology here, one of putting America first, and wherever possible, ensuring the United States is the winner and not the loser. Although not contesting Barack Obama's presidential run, Donald was a highly vocal and at times mischievous critic, promoting the false idea that Barack was not born in the United States and therefore not eligible to be the president, resulting in Barack Obama releasing his birth certificate in 2011 to disprove his allegations.
No one is happier, no one is prouder to put this birth certificate matter to rest than the Donald. And that's because he can finally get back to focusing on the issues that matter. Like, did we fake the moon landing? What really happened in Roswell? And where are Biggie and Tupac? Obviously, we all know about your credentials and breadth of experience. For example, no, seriously, just recently, in an episode of Celebrity Apprentice, you, Mr. Trump, recognized that the real problem was a lack of leadership. You fired Gary Busey. And these are the kind of decisions that would keep me up at night.
Donald Trump has been saying that he will run for president as a Republican, which is surprising since I just assumed he was running as a joke.
From what we know about Trump, he would not have taken this lying down. Although mocked by the Democrats, Trump had elevated his standing in Republican circles. This helped him in 2015 when he announced his candidacy once again. And now not only was he running seriously with the Republican Party, but he had the full arsenal of truthful hyperbole to make mincemeat of his primary opponents.
First of all, Rand Paul shouldn't even be on this stage. In Wisconsin, you're losing $2.2 billion. And when the people of Iowa found that out, I went to number one, and you went down the tubes. I promise, if I wanted it, I would have got it.
For anybody on this stage.
I was a businessman. I got along with Clinton. I got along with everybody.
Yeah.
That was my job, to get along with people.
But the
I didn't
simple
want
fact
to.
is-
Excuse me. 1 second.
No.
I
The
didn't
simple
want to.
fact is,
Jeff,
Donald,
oh,
you
good.
cannot take-
More energy tonight. I like
No.
that. Wrong.
Full
Don't make
fact
things
is-
up, Jeff. Don't make
cut
things
me
up.
off,
Come
sir.
on. Don't make things.
What we see from these primary debates are two things. First, Trump's tactics. This hyper-assertive skill set that enabled him to get what he wanted back in the 1980s clearly dominates the room, takes up the most speaking time, and makes the other contestants appear weak and incompetent.
Lying Ted, lying Ted.
What's your name? My name's Lion Ted Cruz. In the case of Lion Ted Cruz, Lion Ted lies. Oh, he lies. You know, Ted, he brings the Bible, holds it high, puts it down, lies. Little Marco, crooked Hillary, fuck.
And then, that truthful hyperbole comes into play, with Trump inventing nicknames for his opponents that build on a certain kernel of perceivable truth, which he then repeats and reinforces into a narrative that serves his success. Trump took this approach forward against crooked Hillary, but during his campaign, there were a number of setbacks.
You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie
several...
O'Donnell.
For the record, it was well beyond Rosie O'Donnell.
Yes, I'm sure it was.
Your
She gets out and she starts asking me all sorts of ridiculous questions. And, you know, you could see there was blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever.
You know what? Look at my African American over here. Look at him. Written by a nice reporter. Now the poor guy, you got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember.
And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Whatever you want. Grab him by the pussy.
What we see here is that Trump's combative style, whilst effective for tactical wins and certainly engaging in most cases, is not really an area of strength for him in terms of public appeal. It's hit and miss. Sometimes it fires people up and wins him support, but at other times it backfires, and he comes across as nasty, lecherous, or even a cruel person. His style of insult is also reflective of Trump's materialistic and physical way of thinking, always focusing on the superficial rather than cutting to something deeper, which when combined with modern sensitivities around women, is very potent in outraging his opponents, but also can put a lot of regular people off. This unreliable, high-risk charisma, which I like to call the buffoon effect, is something observed in a number of similar politicians, whether Jair Bolsonaro, Silvio Berlusconi, Javier Milei, Boris Yeltsin, or even Boris Johnson. It certainly generates publicity, although with rather more controversy and vitriol that is constructive. It has helped Trump to build a very strong base of support as an unabashed, non-politically correct defender of a common man against the liberal elite, but has also prevented him from uniting the rest of the country around his persona. If Trump had lived a few hundred years ago, or lived in another part of the world, this would not have held him back. But in a modern Western society, where aggression is almost always a taboo and compassion and gentleness are touted as virtues, it has become a constant handicap for Donald. However unstable his own charisma may be, Trump's advantage lay in the sheer lack of charisma shown by his opponent, Hillary Clinton, whose hyper-controlled, technical, legalistic way of speaking, obscuring a long record of questionable activity in office, left her open to Trump's robust attacks.
I'm going to say it, and I hate to say it, but if I win, I am going to instruct my Attorney General to get a special prosecutor to look into your situation, because there has never been so many lies, so much deception. There has never been anything like it.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
Despite the polls consistently placing Hillary ahead of Donald, the unthinkable happened. Donald Trump won the election, and the response was perhaps the most intense in living memory.
Donald J. Trump is now President of the United States. President Obama is the ex-president. And Mr. Trump, for the moment...
He will not divide us! In Oakland, what started as a peaceful protest quickly turning violent. Demonstrators burning flags and vandalizing cars. In San Diego, police struggling to keep control of scores of demonstrators.
The question is, how could this have happened? Trump was so unpresidential, so crass, so offensive to modern-day sensibilities. Certainly in the United States, where the president is not just head of government, but head of state, and therefore representing the spirit of a nation. Having a man like that must have been traumatic to many. From evaluating historical presidential wins, Trump's victory makes much more sense. I believe that most presidents, often due to the asymmetries of their temperaments, leave behind some kind of hole or need that their successor is elected by the American people to fulfill. With Trump's predecessor being Barack Obama, we can see how his mystic personality type, so dedicated towards abstract universalist ideals, and lacking that assertive confrontational approach, left a gaping conqueror-shaped hole of toughness and nationalistic realism. Although elected on a platform of progressive moral authority, a hope for social justice and interracial unity, Obama also allowed the global economy to outcompete impoverished workers in the American Rust Belt. He was caught on film bowing to the king of Saudi Arabia, and was felt to have appeased the Iranian mullahs in the deal that he struck with them. In doing so, he undermined trust from the voters that, if it came to a choice between the interests of one's country and the rest of the world, that the president would put America first. In contrast, Trump's physical dominance, his plain-speaking roughness, his clear message on being tough on America's enemies, taking back control of the Mexican border, protecting American industry, and making other countries pay their way on national defense, all served to answer the need left by Obama. Despite the shock and outrage from his political opponents, Trump's time in office was overall quite successful. Contradicting fears that he would press the nuclear button, Trump's presidency also saw a vastly improved situation in the Middle East, with Trump leading extensive and successful efforts against ISIS in the Levant. He pulled out of the deal funding hostile Iran and assassinated one of their top generals, whilst the work of his son-in-law Jared Kushner and other diplomats led to the signing of the Abrahamic Accords, an incredible feat by most accounts. He also, surprisingly for a highly assertive president, didn't start a single new war, and indeed other powers appeared very reluctant to enter into new conflicts on his watch. The president, painted as a would-be fascist by his detractors, also resisted imposing lockdowns or vaccine mandates, not stripping away people's personal liberties during the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, which led to significant criticism by those who wanted such an expansion of government power. Again, we see the positive hallmarks of a conqueror, that force of will, decisiveness, the drawing of clear boundaries, and projection of strength that was feared and respected by non-Western countries, as well as the ability to inspire efficient action by appointing competent people to important tasks. This is backed by his coherent civic nationalist ideology of putting America first, ensuring the country won in everything from its military engagements to its trade deals. However, we can also see the downsides, with Trump's controversial character and inability to make people amenable to compromise, leading to gridlock in the houses of Congress. Western allies were wary and even embarrassed by Trump, and it seemed at times that the mainstream media ran their entire industry on talking about all the wrong and unacceptable things he had done, helping to foster an extreme hatred of Trump in the left-leaning population, which gave way to multiple violent riots in areas such as Portland, Oregon. This hatred reached the top of the opposition, with Democrats becoming more and more willing to remove Trump by any means necessary, including impeaching him for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. As much as one may call this fierce, often excessively negative response Trump derangement syndrome, it is still something that should be seen as a weakness of Trump, that he ultimately wasn't able to overcome it and unite the country, and it has helped fuel the fire that has continued to burn away at the reputation and stable governance of the United States. Obsessed with what the media were saying about him, Trump would avoid detailed briefings, preferring to spend time watching the television as a means of informing himself. Again, prioritizing public reputation over personal relationships, his habit of quickly turning against people who are critical of him in public, as well as his impulsiveness and lack of appetite for compromise, led to low morale, policy confusion, and a very high turnover within his administration. This is the issue with conquerors. Yes, they act quickly and decisively, radiate certainty, strength and confidence in their actions and reinforce narratives, but the lack of willingness to open up to different points of view, or to reflect on their consciences, can make them too boisterous, too strident, too combative, and lacking in the humility needed to make and keep many of their allies. In 2020, another election was underway, this time with Trump facing off against Joe Biden, the elderly vice president of Obama. Instead of a cold, technical Hillary, Trump's new opponent was charismatic, at least he used to be, and knew how to say the right things to appeal to the wider electorate. He knew exactly what was needed to appear presidential and normal in a way that played on Trump's difficulties. The problem was, Biden was the oldest person ever to run for the role, and he was frail, with a mind that was deteriorating, and required him to rely on autocues rather than take the risk of speaking off the cuff. However, with COVID on the rampage, Biden was kept indoors and away from engagements, avoiding the scrutiny that could be leveraged against his fitness to serve in one of the most demanding roles faced by the country. When the results came in, it was to the shock of the Republicans, with Biden becoming the new president-elect. This defeat brought out the worst aspects of Trump, and without grace, humility, or a connection to the established facts of a situation, he refused to stand down, instead fanning the flames of conspiracy about the election being stolen. This, again, is a problem seen with conquerors. They are all about winning, and when they don't win, the lack of reflection means they often default to a continued battle with self-serving narratives, losing much of their dignity in the process. We have seen this with similar conquerors in American history, such as Teddy Roosevelt, who, when he lost a Republican primary, proceeded to found a new party and split the vote against Taft, allowing Wilson into power. Such accusations of electoral interference were not unprecedented. Nevertheless, the very public actions of the sitting president fomented disorder in the country. This led to the actions of January the 6th, in which, whilst Trump was holding a rally for his supporters, a group of rioters marched on Capitol Hill, gaining access to the houses of Congress and severely intimidating a number of senators. The symbolic gravity of the event was profound, and Trump's rhetoric was blamed, and it solidified the narrative that Trump was an enemy to the democratic process. These events led to the unprecedented cancelling of a sitting president of the United States. He was impeached a second time for incitement to insurrection, and in a shocking turn of events, was even suspended from posting to Facebook and Twitter. This led to years in the wilderness under the troubled presidency of Joe Biden, with Trump facing many legal battles, including an attempt to remove him from the ballot, which was shot down by the Supreme Court. One court case even succeeded, and convicted him of falsifying business records in an attempt to cover up the hush money paid to adult film star Stormy Daniels. Fortunately for Trump, the charges were not sufficient to immediately send him to prison, and are likely to result in a fine instead. The judgment has since been appealed. Incredulously to some, despite everything but the kitchen sink being thrown at Donald Trump, he has not backed down. A year after his social media cancellation, he had a new platform created, Truth Social, and has remained highly popular within the Republican Party, securing their nomination in March 2024. One reason making this possible is also a consequence of Trump's problems with relating to people. Although it has made him unfaithful in the past and unable to hold on to some of his closest relationships, it has also made the status of his relationships, for good or for ill, remarkably liable to change, and he has often treated people based on what they have most recently said about him, rather than based on something deeper. Against the many people who Trump has fallen out with over the years, there is a clear pattern. When they criticized him, opposed him, or gave him a hard time, Trump went on the total offensive, returning firepower tenfold to establish dominance. However, in the instances that they later showed support and complimented Trump, he was quick to put the matter aside, not holding hard feelings now that the battle had been won. And this is why I don't think Trump will seek personal vengeance should he be elected the president a second time. Yes, he is likely to try to dismantle the deep state as a hostile ideological structure, but in terms of the individuals that he feels has acted against him in recent years, as long as they change their expressions of intent and are nice to him, he will be nice to them back. Finally, we come to the shocking events of July the 13th, 2024. With the election season underway, Trump attended a rally in Pennsylvania. A shooter, concealed on a nearby roof, fired at Trump's head, and at the last moment, he turned to look at a nearby screen. The bullet missed his head by millimeters, instead hitting the top of his ear. His face spattered in blood, and with Secret Servicemen rushing to protect him with their bodies, Trump paused to raise his fist, shouting, "Fight! Fight! Fight!" In moments such as these, we finally see why conquerors are the way that they are, and the value they can bring to the most intense of life and death situations. In our modern world, conquerors have perhaps the worst reputation, where might is never right, and the underdog is seen as inherently virtuous. And this makes the likes of Donald Trump easy to villainize as little more than schoolyard bullies. Yet, in this moment, Trump's quick thinking, stubbornness and force of will, strengths that were never appreciated by the public as positive, finally found a context in which they could shine. The same qualities that made millions see him as obnoxious now made him seem inspirational and a figure of American heroism. It's no wonder people think his second election is all but assured. And it was probably the final nail in the coffin for Joe Biden, causing him to step down as a Democratic presidential candidate. Nevertheless, Trump has paid a heavy price for his immature, irresponsible, sore loser mentality. And you could say that the mere fact he is electable at all now, given the attempts to make him a pariah, is testament to the total failure of the Biden administration that followed him, as well as the total lack of credibility in their warnings. Either way, this is a topic worth revisiting once the next president, whoever they may be, is sitting in office. And with that, I wish you all good day. In my next video in the American Political Figures series, I'll be covering Kamala Harris. Will she have what it takes to take on Donald Trump at the presidential election? Hopefully I can turn up some insights and help to answer that very pressing question for American democracy.